Welcome back, race fans. This is the Crank Brothers Race Review series where myself and some selected co-hosts will break down each and every World Cup DH race this season. Crank Brothers is synonymous with the DH racing circuit, last year celebrating an incredible 14 years in a row of Elite World Champ wins with that mallet DH pedal. Now, they also won the 2024 World Cup overall title on the pedals. And it's not just pedals. Crank Brothers has been adding to their product offering over the last few years. And now a whole host of race winners and podium contenders are in their shoes. Riders like Ronan Dunn, Andy Cole, Bernard Kerr, Ocean O'Callaghan, Lucas Shaw, Cammy Belange, Troy Brosnan, and Benoit Coulange, plus many more. And in other exciting news, Commensal Makov will be running the Crank Brothers wheels this season. Now, I'm personally blown away by the shoes and pedal combo. I am a Boa Mallet shoe guy myself. It is easy the best shoe I have ridden. Welcome back, sports fans. I am hot off a plane directly from Champery. Alan as well. He's barely caught his breath. We're just so excited about the race. We're going to get to it. And you might have heard in the intro how successful Crank Brothers have been at the World Championships. Well, it's getting better, even when you thought it couldn't. It's 15 years in a row that they've won that Elite Men's World Championship on the pedal. Man, iconic run from Jackson Goldson. But we've got so much to unpack. It's awesome to have Alan Milway back. He's had such a busy year. It's tough to nail him down. Talk to me, man. Iconic venue. I refer to it as daunting in this studio, in the booth, because I think if you were around in 2011, 2007, before that, before they'd done some of the work they'd done, I think you could have a bit of a head scratcher before you got there if you weren't comfortable.
Yeah, it's an intimidating track, isn't it? It's very steep, and you pick up pace very quickly. So some of these tracks on steep hills kind of really crisscross the track, but this just goes down it. It's an iconic venue. I think that for me, it was a privilege to have Danny in our pits because I think he's a big part of why it's so iconic. And I was trying to remind him that I think a lot of people there were celebrating that 2011 event, and he should look at it as a celebration, not a kind of people expecting him to repeat it, because that won't get repeated. So a hell of a venue, eh?
Yeah, that's well said. It is famous for that, isn't it? The commentary with Warner and Pagey, and when things were a little looser in the booth, for sure. I had to hold my tongue. I try to pay tribute to some of their sayings without using certain words that they were allowed to use back then. But yeah, it definitely, like you say, you have to thank Danny for making it so iconic, so famous, and that is a lot of pressure and subconscious expectations to try redo it. It's always nice to go back to a track you've done well at, but you're never going to create a run like that again. The conditions, the timing, the way the course was designed, it has changed. I would say for the better, for safety, that's for sure, but turned into a little bit more one line, and especially in the dry, it's more predictable.
Yeah, the track's amazing. Let's just put that in a sentence and let that sit. And there is a bit of a but, in my opinion, and that's the fact the track is a bike park that's been open all season. So a lot of people have had a lot of time on that track. And I'd say I noticed that most starkly in the contrast between Lena and Gracie. So Lena, our junior girl, and Gracie, racing elite women. When they did their first runs together, Lena just knew where she was going. She'd been here previously, and you could really see that. And the people who haven't had much time on this track, I think, I wouldn't say they were scrambling, but they probably took a lot longer to settle into it. And I don't know what I think to that. I don't know whether that's a good idea or whether really we should have a track that we're racing to be kind of taped off and say, look, we're going to let that sit. We're not going to give anyone that time. And there's no, I'm not suggesting it changed the results in any way. It's just a fact of the matter, really.
Yeah, we've spoken about it before. In a perfect world, it would be amazing to have a fresh track that no one's really had runs on, but you can't fault anyone for going there, that's for sure. And I think by race day, everyone's sort of caught up, but you could visually see it in practice. Who has done run? It's not just where to go, which section comes after which. You can just see the the commitment, the touch and feel, like their chilled run was way faster than a guy,
Mm.
really just trying to understand breaking points because of the severity of how steep it was. And then they took out some of the bike park, say, chicanes, and they went down straight a few sections, which was great, right? That made for a few line choices. But I mean, the one guy had his phone on the ground, looked like 80% gradient in that one of the first steep sections. I mean, maybe it
Yeah.
wasn't quite accurate, but you just couldn't see how steep it was on the TV. That's for sure.
No, it really did. You were sort of fighting to set your speed for the next corner, and you were just trying to scrub off that speed and just try and work out how little can I scrub off. But there are a few sections where um, it's around split one. The riders were. It's just after where Bruni crashed on that left-hander. You sort of had to peer like meerkat over the top of this crest to say, right, what is going on down there? And as they got through the week, you could see the riders that were more confident to have that commitment to go over a blind crest, because there were quite a few of them. And even in the open sections, a couple of blind cresting jumps. And I think you might have seen the footage of Till. I think it was Till Aran just kind of sending it all the way over this blind rise to the very bottom of the next turn. And that takes a lot of commitment, a lot of understanding in exactly which way the track's going. And the weather conditions played a part. We walked it in the dry, and then rain came, and it created a real muddy mess. And there was a practice session that was very, very muddy. And I think some people felt as though that was a threat to their weekend. I might get injured here. I might just get hurt. Let's just try and, is it even worth riding? And some people used that as an opportunity. And after the managers were fighting for more practice time because we were given very little initially, they did rejig the schedule. It kind of felt a bit weird on this practice session where I think Valley, Amory, Miriam, Loris, Lisa Bauman, a few others just didn't even ride their bike. They were like, it's not even worth it. We know where we're going.
And what did you think to that? I mean, I guess it's tough to guide a rider. You got to try understand like where they're coming from. But in hindsight, someone like Loic, that could have really hurt him. Having that crash in that practice session, that ironically was in that in between conditions. And considering there was an extra day practice, they didn't have a lot of time. Like they only had 2 hours in these sessions. But I would have not really thought it was a bad idea to miss that, to be quite fair, considering like if you look at the weather report, it looked pretty accurate. It's going to be drier the next day and then almost bone dry the following day. So I guess the thought process is you could go out, get a bit more bike time, have fun. Like I heard Chandra saying to his guys, like every time he saw them, remember what this session is. Have some bike time, have some fun, but do not push. And then, I worry for a rider. If a rider was doubting going out, I almost say don't go. Because if you're doubting and you semi-commit in those conditions, you could risk a crash.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. That was pretty much my opinion. I felt as though Gracie should ride it because she hadn't been there before. And I felt as though the laps were really important for her. There was 2 sections that were switchback after switchback after switchback. And it's quite easy that you could almost in your head mix them up, which one you were in, because they were so repetitive. And my opinion was that was an important session for her to learn the track. But as she got into that session, I think she felt it was a threat to the weekend. It was really slippery. She missed a line a couple of times and she was kind of getting a bit spooked by those conditions. And she did a couple of laps and then thought that the risk outweighed the reward. And Lucas on our team had a big crash in that session. And for Danny, we were playing with line choice, and deliberately so, because we wanted to take him out of that being perfect. Like we wanted him to understand where the ruts were forming, because I think that's something you could overlook. If it's rained, the ruts will form in a certain way, and then they will be, when the sun gets on them, they develop in that way. So that was, I think, a good insight. But we were trying inside lines after that really steep section where there was multiple lines and riders were actually riding over the back of the bike park berms. You jumped out into the open, and we were just playing, trying to say, like, try and stay inside on the grass, because the bottom catch was horrible and mucky. It doesn't matter. You're not going to race that line, but it was for that exact reason you just mentioned, trying to keep it interesting, bike time, but not risk a potential crash. And It's really tricky. You might have seen Jackson had quite a big crash in that practice session. He just couldn't really stop and went over the bars, and I think he tweaked his ankle, but got lucky in that respect. So that track eats you up. If you have a crash there, it's quite hard to slide out and get straight back up again.
Yeah, absolutely. I could see that track, if you just didn't get going quick enough in practice, like you could really have a bit of a problem building confidence.
Yeah.
And we saw that with a few riders. And I do think that's the unique thing about World Champs that you have to dig into. It is, it's this once a year race that sometimes people think, oh, what a silly thing to do in the sport. But as time progresses, it is just so unique. To have this race, and some years you are forced onto a track that definitely doesn't suit you. On paper,
Yeah.
there's certain riders that have voiced it openly afterwards, or you could just see in the speed, like it's not what you used to out of them. Benoit Coulange said he just didn't quite get on with it. And I would say on paper, Lars Vergier, it's not
Yeah.
the exact track I would design for him. So to sneak out with fifth is really good. And maybe Lucas Shaw as well. So that's almost the best he could do considering how the week went. That was interesting. But it makes me think of the time, my first World Championship, to date myself, 2000 Sierra Nevada, the famous story of Miles Rockwell. Looking outside his bedroom window because it was above tree line. And granted, we're in the middle of summer. It's in June or July. It was like an Olympic year. He looks outside. There's snow on the ground, but he sees that it's blue skies, sun's out. The temperature is going to be 25, whatever the temperature is going to be. He knows it's going to dry out, and he's used to this at home, and he elects not to do practice.
Yeah.
So he doesn't go out in the cold. He doesn't learn a track that's not going to be like it is in race. Like, part of me thought you could just drive over to Morjan, do 3 or 4 fun runs, keep the stoke, and then come back the next day to keep your bike time. Part of me was like, I wonder. It's quite a gamble to do that, but it's for some riders it could really work.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is having confidence and trusting yourself, is not double guessing yourself. And on that hill, for those who haven't been to Champery, mountains tower around it. This incredible scenery. But in early September, it takes a long time for the sun to rise up above those peaks. So it was a really bizarre situation. I was wearing 2 jackets until about 10 o'clock, and then I was in a t-shirt for the rest of the day. The temperature range was that high. And for the riders, they would have sometimes just 1 hour practice. The practice sessions were quite short on a number of the days, and then they would either qualify or race a lot later in the day. So the conditions were hugely variable. And the nature of World Champs as well, for those who might not understand the sort of the background to these things, Warner Brothers have nothing to do with the running of this event. So none of the WBD guys were there at all. Our accreditations for the World Cup mean nothing here. We have to completely get reaccreditation for this. The track crew is different as well, and that's not better or worse. It's just different. So we have to feed back to a different group about that. And it does make it a very much a standalone event where everyone's trying to get their head around a very different schedule, a very different layout. The juniors race on a completely different day. So we had, woe is me, but I had a junior, we were up on the track at 8 a.m, and Danny's qualifying run on qualifying day was at 5:40 p.m. So, it's a long drawn out day for the staff and the mechanics. And it's something you have to get your head around and have to understand. So potentially missing an hour early in the morning is a brave move. But if you've got that self-confidence and you don't doubt yourself, maybe it's a way to preserve the feeling. If you've been on the track in the bone dry, preserve that feeling and go on that.
Yeah, no, it was super unique. Conditions were definitely flavor of the week. The qualifying run you mentioned being so late, I'm really glad there weren't course holds on that day like there were on the race day. But as you mentioned, with the huge towering mountains, the shade came over the track. So that's one thing for vision. But because the temperature dropped, it got even more greasy. You could hear the guys saying it was super greasy. So yes, 80 riders went through, but you didn't want to land in the catch fencing. Someone like Miriam Nicole, considering there were 3 did not starters, she snuck in 40th. there were so many sort of lucky things that happened. So yeah, super unique. But you mentioned the track, so it's this iconic track. We've all spoken about it. It was so cool seeing all the old videos and a lot of funny memes going around about all the old downhillers, like in wheelchairs, talking about their days and just get back to the old age home. But it certainly is more rideable in this day and age. I think everyone will admit that because, as you said, they do have a bike park there. That is one of the tracks.
Yeah.
If you are, wow, I would certainly say an experienced rider with a lot of, well, I can say it on here, with a lot of balls, you would go and ride down that track. I think I would stay over in Morjan, but anyway, it was a cool track. I think so unique. Like, it has to be on the calendar, I think, going forward. It's just like, it's downhill. You want to go to different venues. You want to challenge different skill sets. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think this track is a great World Cup track because although it's a bike park track, it doesn't necessarily feel like that. The berms aren't your sort of manicured berms; they're over rocks. A lot of them are very tight with a lot of exposed rock, and it's a big challenge to get down that fast and maintain momentum because there are so many corners. I don't know. I haven't watched back the coverage, so I don't really know how much they were able to cover of that track. But they're just relentless corners. There must be 100 of them, and if you can make a quarter of a second a corner or a tenth of a second a corner, then obviously you're going to gain a lot of time. But the reverse is also true. So you'll have seen in the split between split 1 and split 2, there was a gulf of time, to be won or lost there. So everyone would come. The first split really didn't mean anything, and I'm sure statistically that wasn't necessarily the determinant of the winner. But that second split really seemed to show if someone was on pace or they were just hemorrhaging a little bit of time every corner.
Yeah, it unfortunately wasn't a lot of between split 2 and split 3, but that was what we noticed in the booth for sure. Is everyone can kind of start fast. There was a little less to the first split. Fatigue hasn't set in. Mistakes hadn't really happened besides Bruni, unfortunately, which we'll chat about later, ironically. But yeah, that's where there was a lot of those linking turns there. If you could just get your flow, like, yes, you had to be aggressive. Yes, you had to open them up wide. But if you just overbreak one of those turns, it kind of like sets you on this weird momentum, right? That's what I noticed in practice. You could just see some guys that had that flow, had that feel.
Yeah, exactly that. And there was a corner that was it was spooking some of the riders, and especially in the should we say the wet practice day, where you would come in with an awful lot of speed, and it was a right hand turn. I think it was the Sam Hill turn where Sam slid
The
slid
Sam
down the
Hill
back,
one.
and you would have to sort of jump some rocks and land in the turn. And if you didn't have the commitment for it, things were going to go wrong very quickly. And when it got really slippery, I was watching on that turn, and Nina came through and did it incredibly well one lap. And then the second lap, she didn't quite commit and had this huge crash and slid out and luckily got up from it. But if you hadn't ticked off these things, if you hadn't got them done early, then you're waiting to race day morning with 1 hour of practice to try and tick them off. And I honestly felt as though there were a number of riders that I saw that I was thinking, if this was ticked off on day one, you'd be fine. If you're waiting to race day to tick it off, you might not have got enough reps under your belt to really feel as though you were super confident to push the edge. And again, some riders, I think, put in a clean run and did really well, but it wasn't at that, that ragged edge that you kind of need to find on a race run, which you're the right side of doom.
I mean, this track, excuse me, specifically was that. Like, that section to me, I was horrified how scary it was because you had to unload the bike but get it lent into the turn. You were going to slip on the rock and then you would wait to catch on the little dirt thing. I obviously didn't mention that until other riders, top riders, were talking about how crazy scary it was. I was like, okay, well, now that you've said it, that turn is ridiculous. They're like, yeah, it's so horrible. And there were a few sections there, I think you had to risk a crash. Like, we all knew you had to be clean. You needed to be precise with your flow. But there were guys that you had to be on the edge. You had to risk having a huge heat to keep the race speed. And that turn being one, you couldn't just get through there clean because then you would have brake too much, and hesitated. But maybe we should jump into some of the runs. I don't think you'll mind me saying, but Greg did say like Max Elron's run was one of the best runs he may have witnessed in general on a bike. I don't think you'll mind me saying that, and it's clearly been said on the internet. It's kind of what I noticed when we were announcing. I thought, man, I haven't always
Yeah.
given the juniors as enough credit. They're racing at different times, all that, but just the way he rode Leger and then the way he delivered there. It's a lot of expectations and pressure, but just how it looked on the bike was
Oh,
was incredible.
I'd say that the two best bike riders in the world at the moment are probably Max Alran and Jackson Goldstone, and they ride completely differently. Jackson's just so playful and so exciting to watch because he's so playful, and Max is riding like he's just cruising and it's so composed, but the speed that he's going is just phenomenal. He has this amazing posture on the bike. He's very tall, his legs are straight, his heels are down, and he just has a lot of commitment where his head and shoulders know exactly where they're going, and then everything else just follows along. And that run that he put in was, yeah, it was mind blowing, really. To set that standard and then have his, um, a good gap to second place. 3+ seconds is, or I think it's about 3 seconds, was really really impressive. And again, the time that they set, it's really hard to compare juniors to elite. I think we've all understood that sometimes we can maybe give too much credit to a junior and maybe not give them enough credit. But his time on that day was the fastest time of the day. It was faster than all the elites qualifying. So you could say obviously that the elites aren't racing. The qualifying means nothing at World Champs, but you can't take away the fact that the fastest man down the hill on Saturday was Max Alran, and it was something else to witness, wasn't it?
Yeah, especially since his brother, topped him in qualifying, which maybe helped Max. Even though it was only point 0.4 or point 0.5 in qualification with Till being at the
Yeah.
top. I thought that's kind of where Max should be, you know? Just like, okay, I know where I'm at. I've got to push it a little bit harder, fight from behind. I thought that played really into his favor. But both the Elrond brothers, but you can't take anything from Tyler Way to all the other juniors. Like this, just incredible times. I just am amazed at how they deal with the pressure so well. They seem to look relaxed. The riding doesn't change much. They don't look too tight on the bike, considering the moment. It's a big moment for their career.
Oh, it really is. I think that next year, 2026, it's got to be very difficult for the elites because they know there's probably 4 or 5 juniors coming up that are going to be in that top 20. They're going to be in that final, and they're going to have to raise their game, because to think that you've got Max and Tyler Waite, who again, to split the Alran brothers, you must have put in a heater. Ollie Clark was in there. And then we've got Asa, who, the poor guy with the puncture, I don't think we necessarily got to know how close he could have got. But yeah, with those guys coming up, it's going to be stressful, I think, unless you're absolutely the sharp end as an elite.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, I mean, in the junior women, most of them are first year elite, first year
Yes.
junior. So not even going up to the, just shows you how good the talent is at such a young age. Those guys all going up. Uh, but in the junior women, they're not even going up. A lot of them, well, one will, but out of the top 5 is super exciting to watch. And it's junior world champs we're handing out stripes. I think it'd be a disservice not to give some airtime there. I mean, your rider, Lena, I mean, that's satisfied, or just is it so heartbreaking because fourth means nothing at World
Yeah.
Champs?
Yeah.
I don't think it
This
means nothing. That's what
I know
people
what you
would
mean.
say,
Yeah,
right?
for sure. I'd say that when Lena came down, she went 12 seconds faster than Specialized Rosa, and we were like, "Whoa, this is going to be in the hunt now." That was a brilliant run. She'd looked composed all weekend. She'd been there previously. She was very, very comfortable on that track, and for us, to be in that fight is amazing, because I think she's quite, she knows Rosa's heel well. You know, they're both Austrian riders, and Rose has got an incredible style. Again, very fluid, very tall. She was doing this amazing gap at the very start. The riders came out of the start hut, turned left on a berm, and then there was an off camber, and she was beautifully jumping this rut and hitting a backside of an off camber just to then spit her out. You know, and it I don't know how to explain it in another way to say she just looked like one of the junior men doing it. And that's going to sound awfully patronizing, but we haven't had this history of junior girls coming through with such skills development at such an early age. And it's only meant as a huge compliment to Rosa that she's riding with such skill and poise. And then to have Ellie, who's the second year, and she was aggressive all weekend. You know, she wanted that. It's her last opportunity to get that goal before moving up. So she was pushing really hard. And then Aletha, who's been competitive all season. So those four girls were, I think, a cut above the rest. And I think that's fair to say that when you look at the times behind them. But when you watch them on track, they're so exciting to watch. It's really great. And to think we've got another year of that cohort as a junior, in junior women is brilliant too.
Yeah, it's not many years ago you would probably be doubting to put Champery on as a world champs track, with
Yeah.
to put inexperienced people down that track. But I mean, they're just showing experience far beyond their years. It was incredible. Okay, right, moving on. So I thought Miriam Nicole's run, considering she stuck it in 40th, considering she's barely raced this year. Yeah, I know she got some bike time before Leger, but cream rises to the top. I think since 2015, she's had medals at every World Champs she's been able to ride. She's got 6 of them silver, fine, but she is a multi-world champion. I thought that ride was so impressive. Like, that's one of the rides of the week.
Yeah, I'd say so. I don't think I look when Miriam was riding in practice, she didn't look as though she was one of the most comfortable. And in sections, she looked really, really good. But she clearly didn't have the build up that she would have wanted. So to put in that run was quite phenomenal. And when you had been trackside all week, Valley looked dominant. She
So
really
she did. Hey, I mean, I saw in a
Yeah.
lot of sections as well. It was fair to say, like, she was on a mission.
She was on a mission, and she got on that mission early, and she was one of the ones that didn't practice on that muddy day. And I think she'd had good enough track time to think, I don't need to know that whether this is a left corner or a right corner. She knew where she was going. And it's also worth saying that I don't think there were that many line choices on that track. It wasn't a track that was developing hugely. There are a couple of sections where an inside rut might develop better, and then you go back to an outside. But essentially, you were trying to open up a corner as much as you could because there were a lot of very tight corners, and you were looking to carry speed in the most direct way. So there are a couple of very steep sections where quite early on we knew that it was just going to be riders right, and you're just going to bomb it down riders right. A few riders on first day of practice tried to go inside, but it just wasn't a thing. And then on the next sort of split section, the girls, you had to get out of the berms because the berms were the easy line, but you put 4 corners in to one smooth outside line all the way around. And Valley got onto that again very early, which was, she just looked great, and she's just so strong. And on a track like that, you felt as though she was kind of bullying the track to do what she wanted, and that says a lot. And I'd say that, yeah, that to me was the dominant run. And the other girls, Marine and Miriam, amazing to be on the podium. And for Gracie, I think she probably feels as though she left a little bit out there because it took her a little bit of time to get into that track. She hadn't been there before. I really felt coming off the win in Leger, she kind of looked at the nature of Champery and thought, this is in my wheelhouse. I've got the skills needed for this. And it was just on race day morning in that last hour of practice that it all started to click. But I just worried that might have been a day late, just to have that comfort at that speed, maybe another couple of runs in her, and she would have found that raggedy edge. Because it's, from her feedback, I think she could have done that run all day long. and that's in a way really exciting. But when you're a second off getting a world's medal, is probably a tinge of frustration in there as well.
Yeah, and would you say everyone would have said, "Oh, Gracie's going to do super well because it's steep," but I think to me she needs a bit more of the technical line choice, light on the bike. Like it's kind of like you've got to have a bit of grit and
Mm.
strength. Like a lot of even the guys said like how hard you're hitting some of those turns and like how deep the suspension's going in.
Exactly that. I think that as as a developing young rider, the feedback you can give on the bike, and that was again something that we found on race day morning, that she gave some feedback that allowed us to change a setup that helped, and I think helped her for the better. But all the way through, having a track like that where you've really got to push hard into those turns and trust them, and kind of maintain your position on the bike. It's a very, very physical track, even though you don't put a pedal stroke in. Really, it's kind of a bit of a strange track, because people might think you roll out the start gate and it's just gravity taking over, but in actual fact, you're resisting it. All the force is coming at you from those big turns and the braking. So it's a big challenge, and Valley absolutely deserve that. And I think Miriam, congratulations for getting so close, because I don't think she had the build up she wanted to that, but pulled off a blinding result.
Yeah, and then Marine after a back injury just before
Mm.
Leger. I mean, that's unheard of. But actually, unpack that movie for Alan, because I should have quoted you. I was saying this track back in the day. Remember, we did heart rate
Yes.
testing, and
Yeah.
Champery scored of the highest, if not the highest, like average heart rate or highest number we recorded without a pedal stroke. I remember you helping Danny and I kept
Mm.
referencing that. Like, yes, there's no pedaling. Yes, it's just steep and straight down the hill, but I mean, your heart rate is just through the roof from the get go. I mean, maybe quick summary of why that is.
Yeah, it's because you're trying to resist everything coming at you. So although you're not pedaling, you're tensing up. You're having to maintain a position on the bike. So under braking, under those kind of the G force of those corners, you're trying to maintain a position. And obviously you've got that adrenaline response where you're suddenly going from 0 to 40k an hour, in the air very, very quickly. So those things together, we were seeing heart rates at 200 beats a minute, literally as high as you'd see them in a VO2 max at the end of a VO2 max test, you know, as as a peak heart rate on that track. And it was, for me, it was kind of cool to have. I was reminiscing a little bit, because obviously I was with you, I was with Danny at that race in 2011, and I've got Danny's heart rate trace from that race, and he was wearing an accelerometer that I've been using all year with him and Gracie, and he was wearing that again for this run. So I can kind of compare those two things when I go through it all to sort of see, the difference 14 years apart, which is amazing, really.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, it is a long time, 14 years since when that just shows you how long Danny's been at it. Remy Tiron's the only rider that did the '07 one
It's
and
seven
the
as well.
10 and the 10, I think it was, and then the 11 champs, and then this one. And then there were
And
only five riders in the field, Miriam being one of them, that did the 11 world champs and this one. So I mean,
and this one.
it's a far different era right now.
It is. And I think I'd like to use Remy as our segue onto the men, because Remy looked unreal this week. And it really is. Remy Tirion is one of the most exciting riders you can watch on a track like that, because he thinks outside the box. He's a lovely guy. He's very chilled out, and he puts his helmet on and he turns into some sort of maniac. And there is nothing better to watch than Remy Tirion when, you know, the normal human being will do one thing and then Remy will do something else. And I really thought that he could have had something in him this weekend, to really pull out some crazy result. And it was great to see him. It was great to see him, and to think that all of those years ago he was racing here, and to still be, I think he was 12th in the end, is mental, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, he was first in the J a week prior, and I think if the conditions stayed sketchy or that in between greasy, that is where Remy can excel. But when it dries so much, you bring a few more names
Yeah.
into the mix, and this is not taking away from any of them. I mean, they probably would have done as good, but segueing into the men, not surprised because I thought Kiefer's practice speed looked really impressive from the get go.
Yeah.
Plus, he's had a podium. Plus, he's shown if he doesn't crash, he's right up there. But I don't think we would have touted him as okay. If a few guys get their ultimate run, their perfect run, and they throw everything at it, I felt like there was potentially four guys. You're Dunn, you're Jackson, you're Amory, you're Loic, and I'm not taking away from anyone. I just that was just like a guess if you forced me to pick four. But clearly there were more than four because Andy Kolb seems like a guy that, when the chips are down, he can figure it out. And I mean, geez, Kiefer's run when he did that, whatever he did from split 1 to split 2 was
I know.
phenomenal. That
It
was where
was.
he really put some hurt into the riders, right?
Yeah, that's where he really did his damage, and I think he had a lot of people head scratching from what he did there. And I wonder, again, something for people to maybe understand is the start list that comes out for World Champs. The riders are seeded in that start list, and that's how they start the final. So the qualifying sends through, basically filters out to have the top 80, but it doesn't seed you. And potentially that could have played into Henry Kiefer's mindset a little bit. He didn't have, he didn't have to lay down that ultimate run twice. He didn't have to lay down that run to seed him in the top 20 or the top 10 or the top 5. He was going down when he was going down regardless. And for some, I think that can help. I do wonder whether there is a bit more for those people like Jackson and like Loic potentially going at the very, very back is what they need to produce their best result. But for other riders, maybe you can kind of sneak in there with a bit less expectation and go, well, no one's expecting, they don't know what's going to happen this time because I'm coming down when I'm coming down. And I think Keith was in the hot seat for ages. And that time in the middle, I haven't gone through all the splits. I don't know how Jackson compared because it looked as though Jackson was able to pull time out at the very bottom more than anything else. But yeah, those runs, it was a young podium, wasn't it? I haven't got the dates of birth here, but they're a young crowd in that top 4.
No, I'll dig them up. I've got them in the notes, but I think that's a very good point to bring up. Is the seeding that they haven't allowed it to reseed for like the weather games and things like that. So I guess that's a positive. But part of me wishes there was the reseed. But I think you're right. It's not taking away from you. You can just play to your cards you've been dealt, and there's less to think about. But when you ride at the end of the field, Loic loves it. He's used to it. He needs it. Jackson as well now. But yeah, potentially a Kiefer or someone else that maybe didn't push too hard because he didn't need to, and then he qualifies 7th. I think like sneakily inside your head, you would go, yeah, I didn't push hard. That was only my 90% run. It could have been 95. Like you can't factually tell me if it's 90 or 95, right? And he's going, oh, I've got something for race day. I can just give it my all now, And that is a really cool point. But I'm taking nothing away from it. I thought that was, almost a gold winning run.
Yeah.
It's just incredible. And the young man's podium, yeah, we got to check Dunn's age, but he can't be more than 21. I'll go check in my notes. I think it's there somewhere.
Yeah, they're a young crowd. And again, with the actual race day, I don't know whether the TV was delayed, but essentially there was quite a big delay. We had a 50-minute delay in the racing because unfortunately a spectator was hit by a bike. So, that kind of did, I think, factor into some of the riders' preparation. No one was red flagged, and what they essentially did was they waited for the track to be clear. They stopped any other riders starting, and then they got the helicopter in to medevac out the injured spectator, which I think was a young child, unfortunately, which is horrible, to think about. And I hope they've made a full recovery. But it meant that there was a built-in gap into the start sheet. If you were looking on the start sheet, they'd actually built in 17 minutes gap between two riders. And it was quite a lot of mental arithmetic going on with us coaches and managers at the top because the UCI were telling us there was a 50-minute delay. But we knew after about 10 more riders, there was going to be this 17-minute break. So we were trying to understand, are you going to keep that 17-minute break or are you going to take
or
16
catch it
minutes
up
off
for
that. Yeah, catch it
totally
up.
catch it up, but only for the last few, and it would still be later than your original time, right? But not too late.
Exactly, but not too
What did
late.
they
And
What did they do?
so what they did was they changed the 17-minute break into a 16-minute break. So they just kept the 1 minute gaps. And we worked out that Danny's run was 34 minutes late. And I was confident that I got my maths right. I'd spoken to the right UCI official and right commissaire, and I had to be brave to start his warm up 34 minutes late because Danny was like, "I got to be starting." I said, "Just trust me, this is the right number." And obviously, we had people at the bottom who were saying, "No, no, it's 50 minutes. It's 50 minutes," and I haven't got time to try and explain it to you that you take the 16 minutes off the 50 minutes, you get 34. So that was quite challenging. But Simon Chapelet, he was literally dragged off his turbo trainer by the UCI commissaire because his run was about to start and
Really?
he hadn't got that right. So for him to put in an incredible run like that, I think was even more impressive because he went to the start line and then their mechanic came running over to Jeff Hunter, one of the Norco mechanics, and said, "Have you got an Allen key?" And he was having to faff with the bike when the bike was almost in the start hut, sort of 2 minutes from World Champ start time. So I was worried for Simon to think this could scramble him a little bit, but he used it to his advantage, and maybe the flip side worked. He had no time to stew on anything or to get in his own head. He was just like ripped off the turbo trainer, squeezed into his race jersey that is tighter than anything we ever wear normally, and thrown in the start hut. Off you go. So, yeah, very challenging for the riders and staff at the top of the hill.
Yeah, cool. So you said you don't know if there was a delay. Our time to go live was the exact time the course hold started. So we had to fill
See.
what felt like 2 hours before we even
Yeah.
saw a rider.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that big challenge there. And then we were talking about the different strategies and what that means to certain riders. And now you've just given us such awesome intel. And I also thought, yeah, a certain rider that could help. Big moment like that, you got no time to think. You just get in the
Mm.
gate, and hopefully subconscious takes over. And that's awesome that you bring him up because that's someone we should mention. It's he was the second fastest Frenchman on the day. He's a youngster as well. Ronan Dunn, if I've got it right, born in 2020, 2020, 2002. So he's only 22 years of age. I think his birthday is still coming. So that's the oldest person on the podium. I
Yeah.
mean, cheeky changing of the guard starting to slip in here.
Yeah, I'd say that the aggression. I didn't see Kiefer's run. I was at the top, so unfortunately, I can't comment on that run. But I watched Ronan's and I watched Jackson's, and the way Ronan rides is so aggressive. He pumps himself up and really goes for it. And the days of the cow, I'd say the juxtaposition between someone like Ronan and then someone like Loic, who's very calculated and very smooth, and almost Max Auran as well. That sort of very fluid style where everything looks very much calculated. It would be a disservice to say that Ronan isn't calculated in his approach, but he's just, I'm going to go as hard as I possibly can and try and get the most out of this hill. And that's so exciting to watch. And, Jackson in his style is so incredibly fast and playful. He makes he bounces around on the bike. And in that grass section, we called it the Remy Thirion line because Remy was the first to do it. But he kind of comes, you've got the sprint down the fire track or the double track. You peel up onto this grass mound, turn right, go under the chairlift, and you could hop right. And when we were doing the side-by-side comparisons, it wasn't the right-hand line that was faster. It was because it was the result of not having to hit that hump so hard. So there was like a berm you went off the back of. And if you were riders right, you could sort of skip right by the tapes, and then it would sort of reduce the bucking and the sort of the slowing down of hitting that the top of that berm. And that's where Colby went down, because it was so tight to do. And if you lost the back wheel, it was game over. And I think that's why some riders opted not to do it because it was on such a tightrope. But when you watch Jackson do it, there was never any doubt he was going to stay on that line, and I think that's what's so incredible to watch in his riding style.
Yeah, I mean, that line was super interesting, as well as he did a gap at the top that he only found on the morning of the race. Whether it was much faster or not, it was certainly entertaining and something so different, and it is unique to see these different lines. But I mean, Jackson, I thought the challenge of that line, especially at race pace in the dry, is like the gravity in the track is pulling you to riders left.
Yeah.
So there's one thing trying to stay high, but you need to actually be leaning the bike the other way. But Jackson just hopped. I mean, he gained traction by not being on the ground, and Kolb was kind of caught, it seemed, in the middle of the hop or trying to stay light and gain traction, and he just got it wrong by, an inch. But very impressive for him to say wasn't feeling that comfortable the whole week, and then to be able to just turn it around and say he's going to go for it. That was cool. I thought Dunn, in a way, was calmer than I expected. I certainly bigged him up that, this is going to be the craziest run we may witness. But I guess with the nature of the track and the bobsled turns, like, you couldn't look that ragged, because if you were too ragged, you'd miss your setups and you'd miss those things. So for sure he goes for it before he gets everything out of a track. But I am seeing, I guess, a level of maturity start sneaking through there.
Yeah, and consistency, because Ronan's always been, in his nuke proof days, it was checkers or wreckers. He was that sort of rider, but now there's less of the wildness on the bike and coming off. It is certainly very, very considered, but the GoPro commentaries, something else. When you hear that guy really wanting everything out of himself, he's not gonna. He's making himself accountable, and that's it's amazing, really. And Jordan Williams, I think Jordan, again, that sort of horrible fourth place where you're just off the podium by I guess a couple of seconds back, but kind of under the radar. Jordan's not had the best of years. He seems to either excel or have a problem. And, to be first of the specialized boys is a huge thing within that team, because the level's so high. And I think that was a great result. And I think Loris was one of those riders that didn't stand out in practice. He didn't stand out as like, whoa, this guy's right on it. And I almost think that maybe he won't be happy with that, but I think he probably would be pretty happy with that run. I think that was a decent spot for him to be in, really.
Yeah, I think for the huge crash he had in morning of practice, as well as me feeling he doesn't suit the track, I can be far off on that. Maybe Loris agrees and maybe he doesn't, but if he didn't quite look like himself, and then to be able to still get fifth after a crash, I think that speaks to why we always speak about Loris and how he could win any race if he put his mind to it, because of his raw talent, and someone I thought would have a good go at Jackson, and it sounded like Thibaut, the team manager, felt like that Amri was feeling and riding like that in morning of practice. We really didn't get to see what Amri could do down the track with a mechanical. So had a wheel issue, which obviously resulted in losing air pressure. I just thought he could be the one that like manhandles the track, pure strength, talent, aggression, happy to ride on that ragged edge.
Yeah, I was really disappointed. I was like, I really wanted to see, I wanted to see this. What can Amaury do? Because he's such an exciting rider. And I think the same was true for Loic, because on the way the live timing was working, I managed to just get down to the bottom to watch the sort of last 8. And when you could see the live timing pop up almost before the cameras, it was kind of out of sync.
Yes. Yeah.
So we saw that Loic was plus 18, and we kind of judged. I was with Lucas Cruz, and Lucas was like, I bet it's in that left-hander just before split 1. And sure enough, literally it cuts to Loic, and he was opening up, him and Jackson and a few others were opening up that turn by kind of riding around the outside of the gully. The track fell away into these 2 rolling steps and then into a very tight left-hander. And you could miss going down the steps by riding almost around it and then jumping in. And it was a longer way in. It when you time them side by side, you lost quite a bit of time by setting up, but potentially you could get it back coming out. I wasn't convinced that you would, but that's by the by. But the way that Loic came in, I think that you had to scrub your speed perfectly to set you up. And it just looked as though he might have got a breaking point wrong, and he just went straight on. And that was such a shame, because again, you want it to be close, you want it to be exciting, and I'd say that that's where the reseeding might be good, because Jackson was the man who won on the day and put in an amazing run. I think almost exactly 2 seconds ahead. Really, you want him to come down last, don't you? From the spectacle of it. But
Yeah, we are talking from a spectacle side and a fan. You want everyone to have good runs for sure, and just
exactly,
may the best man win. But I mean, he has mentioned that he thinks there may have been a fork issue. They're gonna download it with the
oh
team, and
really, yeah,
for someone that's so in tune with his bike. But he's such a professional and good sportsman that he said, I will go and look at it, because either I'm the dumb shit or there was an issue. I would like to know. So he's
yeah.
willing to admit it could have been him and missed the breaking point. But yeah, it's interesting, because some people were just riding around and dropping off on the wide line, but some of them were also sitting up on the bank and almost pre-hopping the wide line
Yeah.
to get on the ground earlier than those other two. So there was like these subtle differences we could notice on the broadcast, and then there was that turn a little bit further on, which was a very slow, steep, tight right, where people could get crazy high on the back and
Yeah.
literally double into the back of some rocks. And it was just so technical. I think Sven was giving Jackson a hard time that he wasn't doing in the beginning, because it was finicky, it was slippery, and it was like risky to get it clean, not risky like scary. It was just like
Yeah,
very,
it was.
very, very technical line to achieve. But if you got it good, you made time. But it wasn't a 10 out of 10 line, especially in the beginning of the week.
No, that was a line that Danny hadn't ticked off early, and he was quite spooked about that line in the wet, because it was so slippery, and he really wanted to make sure he got it done. And that was something that Will Longdon was on the track for Team GB, and Will sent me the video of Danny doing it, because he knew that it was in conversation. He knew that we were discussing it, and it was something Danny wanted to tick off. And it was a very hard thing to do, because the corner literally comes back on you where you're looking. Where the front wheel's going to have to end up, and it was a bit of a rocky mess, and to have that again, I think I don't know whether it was Max or Till that I saw do it quite early on, but the commitment levels to hop the bike, and then again the whole body is leaning in, and for an amateur, I think that's one of the biggest take homes when you watch a professional rider. And if you're an amateur comparing yourself, is quite often the amateur won't have the commitment to look right around that corner, head, shoulders, hips on their way round. They'd be looking at the apex of the corner, and that's when you've got problems. The back wheel drops underneath you and you go straight on. So to see the commitment that these boys and girls put into those lines, and getting the bike where they need to get it to go, it is really something else. And on that track, there weren't that many of those points. They were quite hard to come by. There was an inside and an outside line a bit lower down, and you had a left-hander that was almost back uphill. And again, that had to be done perfectly. So people were chopping and changing inside or outside, and that was dependent on how the rut had formed. But there wasn't too much in terms of line options. It was really, how hard could you commit to hitting these turns and not make a mistake?
Did you visually compare to other tracks? To me, there was a bigger difference between the top few that were going to get top 10 or top 15 or get a win, and then some other guys that would have bigger number boards. But if you see them at Fort William, you see them on a dry Leogang, you go, whoa, that was number board 73. That was so quick through that section. On this track, I could see visually, like you could be on your brakes the whole way down if you weren't confident. And then you saw a few guys, like just the amount of like it's a split second where you let off the brake, and then a split second where you brake correctly, and then you don't touch them in the turn, and you just start making bike lengths on someone that's a professional rider at the top level of the sport.
I know.
You could like visually see the difference. I thought that was quite a stark contrast compared to Fort William, Leogang. Maybe not Val de Sol. Like there, you can probably see speed differences, like the top of the top versus someone that's just trying to break in.
Yeah, I really agree with you there, and it's. I think it's confidence. You know, if you're confident to know that you've got grip and the bike isn't going to slide from under you because of the way that the rock was slippery, and sometimes rock's really grippy, and you kind of got trust in it. But I don't think that was the same here, and because of the gradient and it was so steep that it was quite easy to end up dragging the brakes down, and the people that didn't do that, that's where I think Kiefer really did damage to everyone. You know, that sector, that split 2 to 3 was just amazing, and there wasn't that many riders that were able to push right to the edge and get out the other side intact.
Yeah, and under the radar, we said it a few times. I mean, Dylan Maples, he's coming off a hand injury. He's
Yeah.
in sixth position. I know some people had crashes and what. I mean, that's racing. I mean, it's not even fair to mention that. Between him and Lucas Shaw, like Lucas Shaw wasn't comfortable the whole week, and he's able to put down a run and says, "Oh, that's the best I can probably get out of this track." So another rider, we could say, doesn't maybe suit the track on paper, but yeah, equally impressed with Dylan Maples, Shimon Chapery, and Dakota Norton as well. I mean, as he
Yeah,
said,
fair play to Coach.
like,
Yeah,
I
exactly
mean,
that.
you give him that result while he's trying to do rehab in his kitchen over Christmas or whenever he started doing rehab is actually ridiculous. It just shows you like the mental, resilience that he has.
Yeah, and yeah, Dakota to be in the top 10, brilliant. I heard I can't verify this, but I think it's worth saying it because I think it's fascinating. I hear, and Dylan, correct me if I'm wrong, or anyone at Commissar Makov, I hear he had his shifter on the left hand side because of his injury.
His gear
So
shifter.
yeah, so
Well,
if he
at least he didn't have to really use the gear shifter on this track
true,
much.
true,
I
but
don't
to
know. We
think,
need to look for some photos.
you know what I mean? I think I think what it shows is the grit and determination he's got. That's in that team. That's got to be difficult when you've got Amory and Loris, and then you have the two Aran brothers who are stepping up. You know, is there going to be a seat there? That's quite a tough one. But with results like that, people are going to want him on the team, and he's put on a great showing to showcase what he's able to do.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's all over the internet. We've got issues with YT team. I think that's fair to mention that there are only 4 elite riders allowed on a team at a specific year, as far as if we've got the rules right.
Yeah.
Another rule I need to throw by you, we don't need to take too long, but maybe circle back, is I speak to one commissaire and it sounds like you don't get a rerun when you catch a rider. Then I speak to someone else and says, no, it's up to the commissaire on site at his discretion. So like, I don't know where the rule book stands. I'm trying to get some more digging in on that. It's like super interesting, which I do agree that it probably should be up to someone's discretion, because I do think you should be allowed a rerun. Formally, I've been told there is no rerun even if you catch a rider, which I don't think is fair. So like, I'm trying to get the rule books. I'm not trying to just talk out of my arse here. Like, do you have more info on that, or do we still need to do some digging?
Yeah. So my understanding was that you would get a rerun if you caught a rider. So if you caught a rider ahead of you, you would get a rerun.
And you
Now,
petition, and then you would have to petition and check with a commissaire and
yeah,
like
I
plead
think
your
you would
case.
exactly. I think you would go to the commissary and you would explain that you were held up. And I think if there was evidence of that, then they would give you a rerun. Where
Okay.
this hasn't always, I can't speak on world champs, but in a World Cup, sometimes if you as the rider say you're in Q1, okay, so say you're in Q1 and you catch somebody in Q1 and you reckon that you've lost 5 seconds in that, if you're still outside of qualifying in Q1, there's not necessarily the benefit of taking that rerun, because if you are really clear on yourself and you're going to be outside of the top 20 who are going through, it might not actually be advantageous for you to go up and have another run. And I've heard of that on a couple of occasions where riders have been offered the rerun and actually declined it because it wasn't really worth having. They would go through to Q2 anyway. But I've had conversations around this where it was decided it wasn't really worth actually taking. But I think you are deserving, in my mind, you are deserving of that if you have caught somebody, because the rider needs to essentially, if you've crashed, you need to make sure you're very much out of the way. And you look at the top riders, and we've all seen it before. If a top rider goes down, they get the hell off the track and they wait for the next guy to go through. No one wants to be in the way. But sometimes if you've got somebody, and that's really one of the reasons we had this, I think, if I'm honest, we had the seeding, the qualifying at World Champs. It's to potentially filter out the riders that wouldn't qualify for a World Cup normally, but because of the country they've come from, if that country doesn't have a large downhill kind of scene or community or fraternity or whatever you want to say, a large racing scene, you might be top 5 in that country or top 3 in that country, but where you stack up internationally probably still isn't, high enough to compete on that top level.
Yeah, that's well said. A lot of people are saying, oh, why can't they have all the juniors or something? Well, there has to be a cutoff somewhere. Otherwise, potentially more people come from countries which could be dangerous even to other riders or themselves. So there has to be a cutoff. And apparently the federations do vote for that number of cutoff and stuff. So it's not
Okay. Yeah.
malicious intent by any governing body, as far
Yeah.
as I understand. But I agree, like there should be discretion for a rerun. I just thought it was like a hard, fast rule in the rule book that there wasn't. So that's good to know, and that you riders have that understanding. I think, as we close out, I mean, Jackson Goldstone wasn't there in 2023, wasn't there in 2024. So it's actually his first attempt at the title. I mean, geez, that's pretty nice to be in the history books already. That's going to probably lift the weight of his shoulder. But I do think it'll light a little fire in Loic's belly for the overall, because he's now
Yeah.
crashed at the last 2 World Championship, from winning 7 World Champs out of 5 wins out of a 7-year span, to then the last 2 World Champs looking like he's up for the challenge no matter the track, to having 2 of those crashes. Interesting, isn't it?
It is. And maybe that's the Jackson effect. Jackson is making you ride at your very, very limit.
Yeah.
If you're going to beat me, I'm going to push you that hard. And that is brilliant. And I'd say that one of the guys I was chatting to yesterday made a really good point, that you'd say that on form, Jackson is the guy that you'd want to see as world champion. He's shown us that he's one of the best bike riders, and on his day can win anything, anywhere. And sometimes if you are a rider that might not have otherwise shown that consistently, could the world championships be a bit of a burden? So, for someone like Henry Kiefer, of course, we'd love him to have been world champion, but maybe this silver medal will actually light more of a fire in him to give him that self-belief that, I can be up here week in, week out. Whereas the rainbow stripes sometimes become a bit heavy on your shoulders, and they can actually give you a little bit of like imposter syndrome sometimes, to think, bloody hell, I've really got to step up here every week, and I've not done so at this point. He's not won a World Cup yet. So from that point of view, maybe it's something that, I guess it's my consolation to him for silver, is like, look, man, you're there, you can do it. Let's see more of it for the rest of the season.
That's well said. It's almost a blessing in disguise, even though he's so stoked to get second, but we know athletes that it is a burden. They definitely deserve the win. They were the best on the day, but when you haven't won a World Cup prior, it adds that weight. I remember Danny coming into next season was tough. Charlie Hatton, they call it the curse of the rainbow jersey. PD had won a lot, but ended up crashing a lot in that white jersey. So there was that. But people like Valley, 4 in a row, she doesn't really have the weight of the World Champs jersey at all. So, Alan, thanks so much. This has been amazing. I want to be respectful of your time. I hope we get to chat before the year's out. Any parting words or thoughts as we round up?
No, I think an amazing World Championships. It's one of those events where I think it transcends the sport potentially more than a World Cup. I think that people outside of the sport kind of look in, and who's, because of how they arrange the cycling events, mountain biking kind of gets a bit of a bigger platform. And we're now back for a week before Lenzerheide, where I've seen some work they've done on that track. So that's exciting. And then we have the final two over in North America. So yeah, I'm really excited for the end of the season. I think that, again, we've just talked about riders who may be low X motivated for the overall. I know that Gracie, obviously coaching and working with Gracie, she's probably extra motivated now for the overall because it's so close with Valley, and what better way to kind of move into these last three races.
Well, brilliant. I couldn't agree more. I think I'm more of a fan than ever. I was up and down on the World Championship because it's so different to other sports, but I'm more than ever a big fan. So thanks to Crank Brothers for always supporting this podcast. They were one of the first ever sponsors. They are synonymous with downhill racing. And this year, celebrating 15 years in a row with that elite men's World Champs title. So clearly it works, guys. So get out there, go check them out. Till the next one, peace and enjoy the racing.
Thank you, Andrew.